Hi, my name is Glenn Loos-Austin, and I have a role-playing game that it's kind of like Dungeons & Dragons for people who are not familiar, that I have been developing since around 1989. The game is not finished and may never be finished. However, I have continually made small changes to it over the years. And one of the changes that is essentially complete and interesting is that I have come up with an alternative system for handling movement in combats in a role-playing game. Most role-playing games feature physical combat as a sort of an intrinsic element. And we're talking about combat where you have the little miniatures on the ground and you move them around, and then you basically keep track of whose turn it is, how far they can move, what they can do, and you use that as a way of representing the reality that takes place in the game. And one of the things that has always been less than satisfactory to me is that in general, role-playing games are supposed to be a storytelling experience, but the systems for handling physical combat are often very, they break it down into something that is very much like a board game, where there's a sort of set of rules that don't satisfy those storytelling goals. So I think that there's three reasons why I would want to produce a new system for keeping track of what I'll call henceforth tactical combat in a role-playing game. The first of which is you want the gameplay to be balanced. Whether or not some people think of this as being fair, you want it to be so that different participants in the combat are not strategically advantaged or disadvantaged by the rule set. You want it to be the sort of thing where everyone feels like essentially the playing field is level, or to the extent that it isn't level, that's done intentionally. The second thing, and this is something which I tend to give fairly short shrift, but is still of interest to some people, is that it be realistic. One of the problems with a turn-based system is that a turn-based system for combat breaks things into sequences of turns, where people take their turn and then someone else takes their turn. It linearizes time so that everything happens one after another. But of course, in a real-life combat, things all happen at the same time. And so turn-based systems tend to capture that sort of thing very poorly. And so I'd like to see if I can handle that as well. And the third thing, and this is really what has my primary interest, is narrative power. I want the ability to tell a story as a game master or as a player that I feel like telling, and I want the system to support that rather than interfering with it. That's where I see the most traditional systems for dealing with combat are at least reasonably balanced and as real as a game needs to be. But I find that they fall down in the area of narrative power. What are the traditional systems? Well, there's really two of the traditional systems. The first is initiative-based. Initiative-based, essentially, every participant in the combat is given a dice, typically. They roll it, and if you roll high, you go first, and if you roll low, you go later. And sometimes that roll is influenced by other factors, such as how fast the participant is or something like that. But in essence, you use a random number to decide who goes first and who goes later, and that is the order in which you take your turns. The main problem with this, of course, is that it is somewhat arbitrary, and you end up with circumstances where just because someone rolled first, they have a very significant advantage. This can be extremely detrimental to storytelling in that you can find yourself in a position where you have some plan for the storyline, but you can't execute it because the wrong person happened to go first. The other approach is sort of a speed-based approach. Certain games, most notably a couple of superhero games, take this approach where they say, essentially, every participant in a combat has a speed, and you're going to start with the fastest, and you're going to work your way down to the slowest. The advantage to this is it's more predictable. The disadvantage to it is that it means that you end up with circumstances where even when you want to switch things around, the rules seem to stand in your way. The character who goes faster expects to be able to go faster and will be annoyed, and possibly justifiably so, if you say, well, this combat we're going to have the orcs go first. The reason I think these things caused you to lose narrative power these traditional systems. First is that they have a lack of simultaneity. This affects most notably things like chases, movement of squads, and coordinated attacks. The circumstance where you have a character who is trying to catch another character who is running away, that character, your character goes first, and so you can catch them whether they're faster than you or not, or their character goes first so you can't catch them even if you happen to be in a position where you should just be able to tackle them as they go by. In reality, you want things to happen at the same time, but turn-based systems are traditionally fairly poor at handling that. Squad movement is another area where turn-based systems tend to fall down. If you have a group of 4 people and they want to advance together, maybe to protect each other, possibly they're in some sort of formation, but you break it down into turns, one member always moves forward first and is thus exposed, when the whole point of trying to move forward as a group is that that never happens. And something similar happens with coordinated attacks. If you have 2 people who are working together, they might presumably wish to attack a single target together, but if you break it down into turns, one of them will go first and the other will go later, and that can have mechanical effects. The result of all of this is that in a turn-based system, there tends to be a really strong first mover advantage. Winning that initiative role becomes very, very important in an initiative system, and a result of that is that characters tend to be designed to have high initiative, even if that's not appropriate to the storytelling goals of the character. For instance, a big lumbering guy with a club might not have any narrative reason to have a high initiative score, but the player who designed that character may really think it's too important to neglect. The other thing that this influences is counter-moving. In essence, when somebody does something, your character or a participant in a combat is often going to want to interfere with that, tackling someone as they go by, counterspelling a spell some other character is casting, jumping in between another character and a source of danger, like throwing yourself before an arrow in order to protect an ally. All of those things are strong narrative elements in typically fantasy, which are hard to move into games in some cases, because when you try to move them into the game, it's suddenly much more important who went first. And if you've got the sequence of turns, often in order to do something like that, you have to know in advance you're going to need to and sort of defer your action. It's called holding your action until your opportunity to do it comes up. There's very rarely a way for you to simply say, oh, you know what, I'd like to counterspell because I haven't done anything yet. So the system goals of the Glennworld Tactical Combat System are simultaneous action, reasonable reaction and countering, cooperative action. It should still generally be turn-based, mostly because we want people to have something that they're reasonably familiar with, and partly, of course, because true simultaneity isn't really possible. We have to find some way to break it down into sequence. Otherwise, the participants all talk at once and it simply falls apart. You need to have a way to put it in order. And finally, I want it to be reasonably fault tolerant. Something where if people aren't quite following the letter of the rules or are playing it sort of as a hybrid of the way that traditional turn-based gameplay happens and the new system, that they find something where it doesn't just break out of hand. And so it's important that it work. So let's talk about the system. The system starts with an initial alertness check. This is akin to an initiative roll in a traditional turn-based system. Every participant in the battle is going to make an alertness check, and that alertness check basically indicates how well they apprehend the circumstances in the combat. It's not who's going to act first, because it's presumed that everyone's acting simultaneously. It is who's going to decide what to do first. It establishes basically who looks over the combat and says, oh, there's people over there, I know what everything is, I know what I'm supposed to do, I know what to do. If a high alertness check indicates a good situational awareness of the combat and basically preparedness to deal with it, you get to decide what course of action you're going to pursue first. Then, in turn, we move through the participants from those who made the highest alertness checks to those who made the lowest ones, and people commit to courses of action. They do this in the order of the initiative checks, but the key difference is if someone acts and you have a reasonable way that you could react to that action, you're allowed to just sort of pipe up and say it. You're saying, you know what, I want to react to what you're doing. And this tends to break the combat into sort of little action groups, where one person commits to a course of action, and then a group of other participants react to that course of action. And that can be either a supporting reaction or an adversarial reaction, depending on, of course, who wants to react to it. That action and any reactions to it take place, and then we go on to whoever next in initiative order would go. Everyone still only gets to act once. So in essence, choosing to react to someone else's course of action does, I don't want to say cost you, but it is your new action. Instead of taking some sort of course of action you independently determine, you're going to react to the action someone else takes. So it's an either-or proposition. And then at the end of the round, any participants that did not react, any participants that committed to independent action and took independent action, can attempt to seize the initiative. That's actually a gameplay term for the next round. Basically, they can say, well, you know what, I'm being proactive. If I can throw business buzzwords at role-playing games. I'm being proactive, and I know that, you know, I want to go first. I want to control the flow of this combat. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to react to other people. I'm going to wait till the end of the turn, and then I'm going to try to seize the initiative. So in the next turn, I can go first, and I can basically start taking actions that other people either will choose to or have to, depending on the nature of my action, react to. Tactically, however, that's not always the best. Some people are going to be interested instead in saying, you know what, I actually have a character type that favors reaction. A lot of archers or spellcasters would fall into that category. So what I'm going to do is I'm never going to seize the initiative. In fact, I may relinquish the initiative deliberately so that other characters will go and I can react to it, possibly by shooting them. So the sorts of things that consist of actions in the game are movements and actions combined together. A full movement under normal circumstances, basically you're assuming that your character is moving with an awareness of the battlefield, not interested in getting, you know, shot by people they don't see, so it's not just sprinting around, is moving at a, you know, fast but not unreasonable pace, is 16 squares of movement. Some actions can be done on the run, meaning that you can do them during the first 12 squares of that 16 squares of movement with a penalty to the action. So it's something that costs you in skill, but allows you to basically move around while doing things. Some actions can't be done on the run. Those are referred to as stationary actions. And when that happens, you only get to move 8 squares, but you can move the 8 squares before or after the action, or even move part of the 8 squares, take the stationary action, and then move the remainder of the 8. Basically giving you the option to do something like, say, I'm going to move 4 squares out of cover, fire my bow, and then I'm going to move 4 squares back to cover. That's perfectly reasonable in the system. Some of the actions that can be performed on the run, you can attack with a one-hand slashing weapon, like a sword or a dagger or a knife. You can fire a crossbow or throw a weapon. You could cast a simple spell, in Glennworld terms, a cantrip or a first order spell. You can cast those on the run because they're assumed not to be something that requires a full amount of concentration. You can use a targeted magic item, such as a wand, or you can drink a potion. So these are all actions that you can do during the first 12 squares of your movement without even slowing down. And these are perfect actions to take if you're hoping to carry yourself through the battlefield doing a variety of actions and actually suggest certain sorts of character design. For instance, you may be a character who has a slashing weapon and you're going to run through the battlefield and hit people with it as you go by, so that at the end of the round, you're somewhere where your opponent isn't. Stationary actions would be attacking with just about any other weapon. Clubs, lances, kusarigamas, who knows what. Basically, it's assumed that in order to make a meaningful attack with them, since they're not slashing weapons, you have to really stop and hit someone hard. So those actions, you can still move before and after the action, but you are going to need to stop to actually perform it. Firing bows is assumed to be something that you can't really do on the run. And casting complicated spells, spells of the second order or greater, you have to stop to do those. Then there's a sort of a class of semi-actions, and those semi-actions are movement equivalent actions. They count as 3 squares of movement. They don't count as actions, they count as movement. Things like switching or drawing weapons, getting out items, activating the abilities of a magic item like a flaming sword or a ring of invisibility, or basically just trying to get additional information about the battlefield by deliberately looking around. All of those things don't cause you to lose your action, but they do cause you to get less movement, and you can combine them. So for instance, normally you get 8 squares of movement with a stationary action. If you need to draw your sword, look around the battlefield, then take 2 squares of movement and attack with a stationary action, that's fine. Basically, you're lowering your amount of movement by doing these actions, but they themselves don't count as actions. Whenever your action comes, you can do something called relinquishing the initiative. And relinquishing initiative basically says, you know what? I have the initiative. I understand what's going on. My character apprehended the full nature of this combat, but when it came right down to it, I don't want to act right now. I want to wait for something else and react to that. The thing to keep in mind mechanically is that we don't want everyone to do that. And so this is slightly discouraged, and it's discouraged in the following way. When you relinquish initiative, you have to decide who you're going to react to. Or you have to pick a region of the battlefield which you're going to cover. And what you can do then is, if the person who you decided you were going to react to moves or acts in a way that you could reasonably be expected to react to, you can then react to it. If they don't, you lose your action and you never get it back. You spend the rest of the turn waiting for someone to move so that you can react to them, and when they don't move, you've just spent your turn waiting. This is distinct from someone who reacts to something when their turn hasn't come yet, because they can react to anything. And so basically, if you get to your turn in the initiative order and you decide to relinquish the initiative, it does come with a slight penalty that you do risk losing your action. And that's to encourage people to actually act. Everyone can't just stand around. Otherwise, nothing would happen. Some reactive actions. Reactive actions are like normal actions, but they're taken in reaction to another participant's activities. The character must be able to perceive the action they're reacting to. So it isn't possible to dodge or decide that you're going to cover an area and then shoot the invisible person as they go through it. If you don't know it's happening, you can't react to it. You can still only act or react once in each round. And a character cannot react to an action in a way that is completely unrelated to that action. So for instance, if the combatant on the other side of the arena starts to move, you can't react to that by drinking a healing potion. That's not, it has to be a meaningful reaction to the act. You can react by shooting them, or running at them, or yelling at them, or casting a spell at them, or by if you're reacting to an ally's movement, maybe you could react by shooting someone that threatens them. But it has to be a meaningful chain of causality. You're not allowed to just react in an arbitrary way. It has to be a related action. Some of the specific reactions that you're allowed to do is you're allowed to react to movement. And you're allowed to react to movement by chasing the person who's moving, fleeing from the person who's moving, moving with the person who's moving, or attempting to intercept the person who's moving. If for some reason this is a contentious relationship, one player says, I'm trying to run away and I'm going to zigzag through these trees, the other player says, I want to do it too, and it's unclear exactly how that's going to play out, you can alternate 1 square movements between the 2 characters until you know how it's going to turn out. Usually with the one who acted taking the first action and the reactor taking the next one. You just work your way through it. But in many cases that won't be necessary. If one person is charging and another person says I want to intercept them, the game master can simply say, well, that puts you here and you intercept them here, and resolve that appropriately. You can also react to movement by shooting the mover. This is pretty significant. Basically, if you are a ranged character, either a spellcaster or an archer, and someone moves, one of your options is almost always to shoot them. And that makes, it's simply saying that, you know what, if you're covering the battlefield and someone starts to move from cover, you can shoot at them. Whether or not they're moving to another cover isn't relevant. You can also react to certain sorts of actions. If you have a way to stop an action, if you're a spellcaster and you want to cast a counterspell, if you are a fighter in a melee combat and you want to block, If someone comes at you with a sword and you want to fall back so that they can't hurt you, all of those are basically attempting to counter someone else's action, which you can almost always do if you have a way to do it. If you don't have a way to counter the action, then you can't react to it. Whenever you react, you are allowed to move up to 4 squares of movement. It's less movement than you get if you are taking a proactive action. And the presumption here is that the presumption here is that people who are seizing the initiative and taking proactive actions use the entire round to do whatever they're doing, whereas people who are reacting spend at least some of the round waiting for something to react to, and thus they get a less total movement. At the end of the round, participants, if nothing changed, everyone's going to move in the same order next round that they did this round. Their order is going to be the same order. However, anyone who did not take a reactive action or relinquish the initiative may attempt to seize the initiative with a tactics check. Basically, there's a skill in the game called tactics, and whoever makes the highest tactics check will go first in the next round. Will be able to take actions first, down through all the people that attempt to seize the initiative, and then on to the people that did not attempt to seize the initiative. Basically, in between rounds, people that have been reacting tend to stay in a reactive mode. People that are attempting to seize the initiative take action on their own, and then they can attempt to seize the initiative so they go earlier. Certain sorts of players are going to favor that. Fighters, for instance, with swords are going to want to go early because they're going to want to move to someone and hit them with a sword, while archers may actually relinquish the initiative fairly routinely so that they can shoot at people moving around the field. Hopefully the results of this are going to be some gained narrative power. We're going to be able to simulate simultaneity where it's appropriate. If 2 characters are both wanting to move at each other, basically we can say, well, they both move at the same time and they end up somewhere in the middle. We're going to be able to increase tactical variety. People are going to be able to say, you know what, my character is someone who is supposed to have the initiative and control the flow of combat, and that's because they're, you know, a swordsman from the East, and they can basically simulate that now within the rule structure by sort of, regardless of where they start in the initiative order, they can move up by using a tactics skill to basically get more and more initiative as the combat progresses. Whereas other characters, of course, can say, you know what, I really want to sort of take a passive approach to this and react to other people's doings, and they can sort of fall back. It allows for a certain degree of common sense countermeasures that sometimes get lost in turn-based systems. For instance, if someone tries to run past you 5 feet away, you usually in a real-world situation could intercept them, tackle them, stop them, step into their path. However, in a turn-based system, sometimes their movement will carry them past you, and then your action, when it comes, has to be to sort of chase them. It's a very different reality than being able to just sort of stop them as they go by. And so it sort of allows for a set of sort of like, if your character is attempting to run across a field where there are archers hidden in the trees, every archer can shoot your character, whether it's their turn or not. And that's a pretty key result, is that it increases the apparent threat level of opponents' tactical advantages. I've been in several role-playing game situations where characters look at the rules and say, well, the courtyard is 30 yards across, my character can move 40 yards, so I will take my turn and I will be in the vestibule, and all the archers on the walls don't matter, they don't have time to shoot me. Even in a traditional system, a good GM will probably say, well, actually, they can shoot you as you go through the courtyard. But this gives us a very clear mechanic. Basically, the archers on the walls are covering the courtyard, and they can react to any movement within it. And every single one of them can shoot your character as he runs across the courtyard, which really increases the perceived threat of the situation. You really have to be pretty sure you can take 6 or 7 arrow hits in order to make that call. I have some examples, and the examples, I'm going to try to show how this works with a little bit of discussion. The first couple examples are very simple. The fourth example is fairly complicated. And basically, none of these is intended to be complete. They're just to give the idea of how this is supposed to play out in sort of a real situation. I've used miniatures to try to make it clear. The first example is an example of pursuit. Basically, we have two characters who are facing each other in a melee combat. The two characters one of them has decided that they want no part of this, and basically that character starts to run. Since that character decides to run, the other character has an option to react to it. And that other character can react to it in any number of ways, but one of the ways that you can always react to it is to pursue. And so that character is going to give chase. Now, since this is by definition an adversarial movement, we can alternate. We'll take 5-foot squares, and the fleer is going to take a square, and then the pursuer will take a square, and the fleer will take a square, and the pursuer will take a square. And the end result of all of that is that when the pursuer, and if the movements are about the same at the end of the round, the pursuer will still be right next to the fleer. They'll be able to keep up, or if their movements are different, they'll be able to overtake and attack, or they'll fall behind, depending on the circumstances. But the idea is that for the rest of the combat, everyone who is involved in that flight gets to move all at the same time, so that you can sort of, and if an archer, say, as they're fleeing by, decides to shoot one of them, then that can also be included in that sort of block of actions, so that you know that those things are all happening at once, and you don't have to have sort of an artificial separation where one character moves across the field, then another character shoots at someone with an arrow, then another character casts a spell, and then the pursuer moves across the field later. There was never a gap between them. The system attempts to represent that. The second example has to do with coordinated action. So if you have a group of people who are supposed to be working in a coordinated fashion, in this case, over on the right, there's a squad. There's 4 fighters and a captain. And over on the left are some adversaries. And basically, they roll initiative, and it turns out that 2 of the fighters have the highest initiative checks. Those 2 fighters are going to say, well, you know what, we're supposed to be acting as a group. We want to respond to our leader's actions. Maybe the leader actually has some sort of skill that will give them an advantage under those circumstances. So they say, well, you know what, we're going to wait for orders. Specifically, they say we're going to react, we're going to relinquish the initiative, and we're going to react to whatever the captain does. Then the captain goes, and the captain actually is going to move across the battlefield to the opponents, and the 2 players that relinquished the initiative can react to that. Basically, the captain's going to be, come on, men, or whatever sort of narrative structure you have. The characters can all react to it. 2 of them can react to it because they relinquished the initiative to wait for the captain. Well, the captain has acted, and they can react to that by moving with him. The other 2 haven't done anything yet, which means they're free to react to anyone. So they can react to the captain as well, and they also move forward. And the result is that from the gameplay perspective, the 5 people in the squad charge as a unit rather than charging as individuals. Basically, from a sort of mechanics perspective, the captain moves, and all the other players say, oh, I want to move with him, and they all move with him. And in fact, the adversaries can react to that as well. What they're going to see is they're going to see the captain and 4 units charging toward them. They can react to any one of those people moving toward them, possibly by running away. Example 3 is very straightforward. Example 3 is just to remind people that there are movement equivalent actions. So we have 2 swordsmen who are facing off at a distance of 3 squares. We're going to say that the swordsman on the left has no weapon in his hand. I know the miniature has a weapon in his hand, but the idea is sound. The swordsman on the left basically sees this other person is going to charge him. The other person starts to charge, and the soldier on the left, or the warrior on the left, is allowed to react to that. And they're going to react to it by drawing their weapon. We've established that drawing a weapon is a movement equivalent action that takes 3 squares of movement. And so while they're drawing a weapon, the other fighter is going to move up to them. In fact, they're going to get their weapon out and in their hand just in time. If the other unit had been 1 square closer, he'd have reached him before he got his weapon all the way out, with presumably tragic consequences. If he'd been further away, the other person could have drawn the weapon and then perhaps done something else, like started to back up. All right, I have one more example, and this is the big example. This is a basic example that attempts to carry us through an entire combat. And what we're going to do is we're just going to sort of illustrate how this is supposed to play out in concept. I'm sure that there may be nuances of this that get ellipsed, but the general concept is that we're gonna play this out as real. So we have a long room, and in that room there's a bunch of people, and basically we have two of those people. Marcus and Thuria are adventurers. Marcus is a human warrior and Thuria is an elf sorceress. And there are two orcs who they have just seen at a distance of 12 squares. One of the orcs is Thog, the other orc is Grak. And they're going to decide, basically, right off the bat, that no one's going to be talking here. There's no negotiations. Thog and Grak know that their job is to kill intruders in their lair. Thuria and Marcus, well, their job is to take the orc's stuff. And so, without any need for banter, we're going to move right into an initiative check. Marcus, declares to the GM that fighting is going to commence, and initiative checks are rolled. Thuria wins the initiative. Thog is second, Grak is third, and Marcus is fourth. He's a slow fighter. He doesn't get very good initiative checks. Thuria, despite the fact that she goes first, is going to decide to defer her action to Marcus. In fact, she's going to relinquish the initiative and react to Marcus. Now, that's an interesting choice because Marcus is last, which means Thuria is going to wait while Thog and Grak do their thing, just so that she can respond to Marcus's action in some way. Thog is going to move forward and take cover. Thog has a crossbow. He figures if he moves forward and takes cover, he can do some useful things. If Thuria hadn't relinquished the initiative, she could have reacted to that by shooting him, but she has relinquished the initiative. Marcus could react to that. Marcus has the ability to move in response to that. Remember, it would have to relate to Thog, but he could do any number of things, possibly throw a knife at him or something like that. But Marcus chooses not to react to it because, to be honest, he's looking at Thog with a crossbow and Grak with the sword, and he's thinking Grak might be the bigger threat. So he chooses not to react to that. Thog gets to his position behind the crates and is ready to fire at people with his crossbow. In fact, he tries to shoot Marcus. If Thuria had a free action, she might be able to do something about that by countering it with maybe a deflect spell or something like that. But again, she's waiting for Marcus. Marcus, fortunately, is unhurt as the arrow bounces off his sturdy breastplate. Grak gives his battle cry and charges. Marcus decides he's going to react to that charge by intercepting Grak. The GM says, well, we could alternate 5-foot square movements. We could do, you, then you, then you, but that's not necessary. It's obvious that if the two of you charge each other, you're going to meet somewhere in the middle. So he moves the two figures right to the middle of the combat, facing each other. Now, it's still Grak's turn. Marcus is reacting to Grak. So, whoop, did I miss something? Oh, it's Thuria. Thuria gets a chance to react to this. Thuria says, oh, okay, well, I've been holding off, but now Marcus has moved. Marcus has moved to react to Grak, but I can react to Marcus. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this situation, and I'm going to see if I can do something about Thog. Because Thog is basically out there with a crossbow. I'm going to shoot him to try to protect Marcus. It's, generally speaking, if you are reacting to someone's movement, covering them from hostiles is assumed to be a valid reaction. So she casts a firebolt spell at Thog, which singes Thog's hair but doesn't quite kill him. Then Thuria has some movement, and she falls back. She falls back a fairly good distance because, to be honest, she's not interested in being in the melee. She's got magic. She'd like to shoot from a distance away. Then Grak, whose action started this whole chain of events, takes his swing at Marcus, hitting him. Marcus is bleeding profusely from the arm and swings in return, but misses. Bad day for Marcus. Everyone's now acted or reacted, so this round of combat is over. So as we enter in round 2, here's where people are. Grak took active action, all right? And in fact, so did Thog. So they try to seize the initiative. Grak gets a higher roll, and so Grak is now highest in the order. Thog is second. Thuria, who was before Marcus before, is still before Marcus, but notice that she's moved down from first to third because she was reacting. And Marcus, who was last and reacted, is still last. All right, so ignoring Thuria for the moment, we've got this little cluster of people here. Grak is facing off against Marcus. Thog has a crossbow. And Grak essentially decides he's going to try to hit. But he swings his sword and misses. Marcus has decided he doesn't like being last. So Marcus, while he could react to that, possibly by blocking the attack, decides that he's actually not going to react to it because he wants to seize the initiative at the end of the turn. So he's going to be proactive. He's going to let Grak do whatever Grak wants to do. Fortunately for him, Grak misses. Now it's Thog's turn. Thog is going to attempt to shoot at Marcus, and so he fires his crossbow in Marcus's direction. Thuria, who can react to this because she's, not acted yet, decides to cast her magic spell that deflects arrows, and the crossbow bolt goes awry and smashes into the wall. Thog, disappointed. Now everyone's acted but Marcus. Marcus is going to try to kill Grak because he's engaged in melee combat. He swings his sword, he wounds Grak slightly, and now we're done with this round because, again, everyone's acted. Marcus and Grak and Thog, all of whom took proactive actions, try to seize the initiative. And Thog gets the best tactic check, followed by Marcus, followed by Grak, and Thuria, who reacted yet again, is now moved all the way down from the bottom. Even though in the very beginning of the fight she was at the top of the order, she's done nothing but react, and so as other players have tried to seize the initiative, she's been falling down through the initiative order. She's now at the bottom. Thog decides that the crossbow isn't working out, so he throws it aside. He's not interested in having another arrow deflected by the spellcaster, and he charges at Marcus. Thuria, however, can react to that charge by shooting him, and does. She fires a firebolt across the field, which, alas, kills poor Thog. At this point, Grak is aware that the situation has gotten pretty grim, so Grak tries to run away. He moves about 4 squares away. Marcus can react to that because Marcus wants to, and so Marcus moves in, and at the end of the order, he swings, injures Grak slightly, but doesn't kill him. And at the end of the order, basically Marcus people seize the initiative again. Marcus is first, Grak is second, Thuria is third. Marcus takes a swing at Grak. Grak is wanting to get the initiative so he can get out of here, so he does not choose to react to it, but that proves to be a fatal mistake as Marcus cuts him down where he stands. And that's it for that. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation. The idea here is that basically this is an attempt to codify a certain sort of action-reaction balance in a role-playing game so that you can simulate things that you would want to simulate as a storyteller more accurately while still having a fairly rigid structure of rules to fall back on. A lot of the combat in the Glennworld system is done narratively. You don't always use miniatures. Sometimes you don't even use turns. But when you do use turns because you want to represent things tactically, this is how the Glennworld system does it. And I've used this to pretty good effect for a number of things. But I thought it was interesting enough and to be honest, divorced enough from the rest of the Glennworld rules that it could be used in a variety of gaming circumstances. If you wanted to use it with Dungeons & Dragons, for instance, it wouldn't be a problem. You would need to decide what you were going to use for the tactics skill. But other things, like you could substitute the alertness check for a spot check fairly effortlessly. The distances of movement could all be turned into D&D distances with just a little work. So the system would really hold up even if you were using a different set of systems. My only other suggestion would be that because of the nature of the system, in Dungeons & Dragons, you might want to introduce feats that allowed for certain sorts of reactions. One of the things that exist in Glennworld is that there's something called a maneuver, and some of the maneuvers that you can learn are specifically geared towards this system. So you can have a maneuver that allows you to react to people moving by throwing 2 daggers at them. Maybe it's a special feat, the double dagger throw. Maybe you could put stuff like that into a D&D game as well, so that you would have stuff that was tailored to this system. You could certainly have maneuvers in Glennworld or feats in D&D that gave you bonuses to your initiative checks, that sort of thing. But it really ought to work fairly well as a general idea, even if the rules that you're using are completely different from the Glennworld rules. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope the presentation recorded successfully. We'll see.